Okay, well, good morning, everybody in the UK. Good afternoon, evening, everyone in China, and hello, everyone in between, and welcome to our session on 10 things you must know before importing goods into China. We hope this is a useful session for those who are new to exporting products from the UK into China, and indeed those who are a bit more experienced at it. There's no harm in a bit of revision, I would have thought, and having a look at any changes or any differences in the marketplace that there might be. So our speaker today is Andy Clayton, who is the CEO of LNP China, and I'll read out his bio shortly. Before we begin, just a little bit background on CBBC for those of you who don't know who we are. The China-Britain Business Council is the leading organisation helping UK companies grow and develop their business with China. CBBC supports British companies of all sizes and at every stage of market entry with practical in-market assistance, services, industry initiatives, as well as a membership program offering access, seminars, and significant networking. CBBC works closely with UKTI and the FCO and has a strategic partnership with the British Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, in Guangzhou and Guangdong, Chongqing and Chengdu, providing corporate members with reciprocal membership. Our business-led board and professional team have extensive first-hand experience of doing business in China, and through more than 60 years of engagement, CBBC has built up exceptional connections with government and business across China. CBBC services are delivered through a network of 10 offices in the UK and 13 strategic locations across China. CBBC helps companies to network and learn from China-savvy multinationals and SMEs, to understand the intricacies of doing business in China, and to develop sound strategies for expanding in the fast-changing and dynamic marketplace that is modern China. So that's just a little bit of background about ourselves. So before we begin, I would like to ask if I could, if you could just click on the raise your hand icon that I am highlighting here. If you could just click on that for me. That would just make sure that I am not speaking out into the ether. It can be lonely. It can be lonely speaking out and not knowing who's listening. Brilliant, lots of hands. Fantastic. Secondary to that, if this is a reasonably interactive session today, so if you have any questions, just drop them in here. Type them in. They'll pop up on my screen, and I'll be happy to pass them on to Andy. If they're pertinent to Andy's discussion at the time, I'll stop him and we'll get straight to your question. Otherwise, we'll save it to the end. And if we don't get to it, happy to pass it on to Andy afterwards, and we can follow up. So that's basically the little bit of housekeeping that we have to do. I'll just adjust the screen a little bit now and make it a little bigger, hopefully, for everybody. So our speaker today, Andy Clayton, as the CEO of LNP, Andy drives the growth of the company and its clients. Now based in the LNP UK office, Andy lived and worked in China from 1998 to 2013. So that's a good innings in China. He was operations director for B&Q China and vice president for Nasdaq-listed Elong.com before founding LNP in early 2007. Oxford educated, Andy has a long experience of business in China and is a regular and sought-after speaker on business in China. He is a board member of the London EO chapter. LNP manage back office functions for Western companies in China, including financial operations and HR, along with import and export. This allows their clients to focus on the most important elements of their China business, their people, products, and customers. They have managed over £20 million of sales for Western companies in China and have been operating import, export for 8 years. So that's a little bit of background of our speaker. And the beauty of today is that I actually have Andy sitting beside me, which is rare enough, so I don't have any connectivity issues, and I don't have to have that scary moment where I say, are you out there? So good morning, Andy.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone, wherever you are. I'm delighted to have this chance this morning to talk to you a little bit and share some of my experience about importing goods in China. As David introduced, what we do is we operate as the China arm for a large number of Western companies, and a good deal of them require their goods imported into China. So we have a long experience helping predominantly European customers actually get their goods into market. So today I'm going to try and distill some of that experience for you, let you have a look under the hood, and really share with you some of the pointers for how to get it right and not screw up getting your goods into China. In terms of who this is designed for, the way that I've pitched the content probably is for companies who are maybe at the stage of having their entity set up in China or some kind of an arrangement with a distributor or an importer, and are at that stage of first getting their goods into China. So I'm going to assume a degree of familiarity and knowledge with import-export in general. But it's really looking at things from the China end. In days gone by, a lot of us use China as a place to get things made, to source kit. And so our interaction with China was a bit more arm's length. We could deal with factories and companies out there, and they would take care of the export. Whereas these days, now that more and more companies are selling into China, a lot of us have to get more involved in the actual processes of getting goods in ourselves. For our visuals today, grateful to our team in Beijing. It's as well as a guide to import in China, it's going to be a little bit of a slideshow of some of the major cities in China. So good luck seeing if you can guess which is which.
Will there be a prize for guessing the right answer or no? No? Okay, I'll boo.
Well, it was originally done from north to south, but we kind of changed the order of things along the way. So those of you that are knowledgeable about such things will be able to figure out what order things were originally in. So we're starting off here in Beijing. Obviously, that's the view from the Guomao, the CBD in the center of Beijing. Can we move on?
Next slide, certainly, yeah.
Thank you. So the first thing to discuss a little bit today is the system of HS codes. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, HS codes is the international system used by countries around the world for classifying and categorizing all the goods that are traded between countries. So China obviously fits into that system, and there's a link here to the actual China customs site where you can click on that and go in there and check what the Chinese name of your goods categories are, and also they list out the import VAT, the duty rates, and also any extra documentation that's required for your particular category of goods. But the first thing I wanted to talk about really with respect to HS codes is companies often find that they have a degree of choice as to which HS code they use for a given goods. So for example, we have a client that do aromatherapy oils. And there are different HS codes for their products as to whether it's sold in bulk or as a finished good. And really the only difference is one of volume. So for them, there's a degree of flexibility. Often you'll find HS codes where you've got different categories and then you've got an other, or based on different materials, different colors, different shapes and sizes. So sometimes there is a degree of choice, particularly if there's, so for example, recently we did a shipment of imports, which was a bunch of photographic equipment. And you could either sort of break it down and have it as parts, or you could put it together, and they were all different HS codes. And the reason why this is important, obviously, is because different codes have got different import taxes and different requirements on documentation. So it's important to background check what the various taxes and documentation for your products are in choosing the right HS code. But really, the key to getting this right, and this is a point that we'll kind of come back to again and again, is be led by a customs clearance agent that is expert in your particular product category. Those are the guys that really know which HS codes are used within the market, and it might be different to the ones that are used in other countries that you typically export to. There is kind of this concept of common practice in China, so the HS code that everyone uses for that particular market. And sometimes it can shift a bit over time, and some of them operate in a little bit of a gray area as to what's allowed. So for example, going back to aromatherapy oils, there's a lot of companies that use industrial chemicals for that, which is kind of on the borders of what's acceptable. So really be led by a competent customs clearance agent that's an expert in your particular product category.
Let me jump in, Andy, with a quick question. I'm going to be the person who asks the dumb questions, if that's okay. Your customs clearance agent, is that somebody who should be on the ground in China, or
Sure.
what's the best approach for finding somebody to get your products through customs? I think it is a typically a part of business that's fraught with some frustration, shall
Absolutely.
we say?
Yeah. So customs clearance in China, choosing an agent, I guess like a lot of places in the world, it's a very, very local business. Each port has got customs clearance agents that have got relationships with guys in the customs there. And they don't just divide by geography. They tend to also concentrate around particular product clusters as well. So the first suggestion on picking an import agent really is don't necessarily go with the one that your freight forwarder from overseas has appointed to you, because those would be commercial relationships that they have globally that might not be the ones best suited for your particular product. Now, sometimes it's hard to get around if you're just doing a one-off import, but if you're going to be repeatedly bringing the same items in again and again, you really need to find an import agent that is specialist to your particular industry. And the way to go about finding those, again, this is one of the kind of tricks of importing in China, but it involves a degree of networking in your industry. We often find ourselves in this situation. We have a new client that comes along, and we may not be that familiar with their product, so we'll spend some time talking to distributors, wholesalers, maybe factories and suppliers in that industry, and really always with the intention of just getting an introduction to a good import agent, because they really are worth their weight in gold. Sometimes it's worth going to trade shows, calling around and visiting with people that are in that industry until you find one that works.
If some of the listeners here, wanted somebody like that, could they contact you afterwards? And are you a person to steer them on that kind of thing, or? No,
not at all. Obviously, for the product categories that we use, we have import agents that we know well. But it is such a large pool of those agents. Really, the only places to go are people that are within your specific industry. So, for example, if you're in photographic equipment, you go to the guys that are distributing and wholesaling or producing photographic equipment, and you say, who are you using? And we've reached the point at times where we've actually used someone else to do our goods first time, but requested all of their original documents for reasons of declaration to customers, and then looked through carefully those to find who the import agent was, and then gone to them directly. So there are a few sort of tricks of the trade that you can use to get to them. Now, if you're using a national company, there are large logistics companies out there that will say to you, yes, we've got agents in every city. In truth, very few of them do. What they do is they subcontract to guys on the ground. And again, they may not necessarily be the people that know your product category best. So if you're doing a one-off, you might have to accept that, and the delays that it will almost inevitably cause. But typically, people set up their own woofie out there. It's because when you're doing the same the same products again and again, it's really worth finding somebody that knows the industry well.
All right.
Yes. Now, by the way, that is downtown Tianjin.
Bonus points for people who could pick that was Tianjin.
All right. So next up, we've got around selecting the import price. Now, if you've set up a subsidiary in China, again, there'll be a degree of flexibility as to what price you set for the goods that you're selling to yourself out there. Is it going to be closer to the cost price or your sales price? And there's going to be a bunch of different factors that you'll take into mind to choose that. You want to make sure that you've got enough cash flow for your business in China, so you don't want to be taking out too much of the profit too early on. It's very, very difficult to get any kind of financing for a foreign-owned company in China. So you really want to be as conservative as you can and allow as much cash flow to stay within the business there. Tax, obviously, is a very, very significant consideration in this. And there tends to be a bit of a trade-off and a balance between a higher price meaning higher import taxes on the one hand, but also that'll reduce the profitability of your China subsidiary slightly, which would then obviously reduce your corporation taxes. So there tends to be a little bit of tweaking. But the Chinese tax authorities will have a clear opinion around expectations of profitability of your China subsidiary. So there isn't a huge amount of leeway in doing that. And you still need to make sure that your China subsidiary shows a reasonable degree of profitability. So you have to be quite cautious in terms of how you set those prices. One thing to really bear in mind, though, is whatever price you start with, you should be prepared to stick with. The customs, they take a record of all the prices that a given HS code has been declared at. And they will benchmark you to those separate prices, so you can't be way out. But also they'll look at your previous import prices. And if you have big swings, particularly if prices are going down, you will be challenged and goods will be held up and you'll be asked to redeclare. Another thing to bear in mind on this is from the end of last year, SAFE, the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, have had a new rule, which is that if you've imported goods into China, if you try and pay for those goods more than 3 months out from the period of import, they won't let you, which means that the actual funds for you're trying to get back from your China subsidiary can end up orphaned in China, which obviously is a very uncomfortable situation to be in. So it's not just a question of price, obviously it's more of a cash flow question, but you also set your price with a view to be able to get yourself paid within that period. And this here is Qingdao.
Sunny Qingdao.
Yeah. All right. Look like the Qingdao I remember.
Just a quick question. Many of our listeners might not, when you say China subsidiary, would that imply that they have a legal entity in China of their own? Perhaps it could be exporters who are just, exporting to an agent or a distributor or something like that. Would there be any things that you would add, on this topic?
Yeah, so on this topic, the assumption of everything I've discussed there is that you were exporting to your own subsidiary in China. Obviously, if you're dealing with an agent, then there's all the commercial terms of how you set that price with them, and it'll be dictated around market price and whatever agreements you've got in place. Now, this is one of those topics that you can actually go on quite a few tangents for.
I won't let you.
No, but if you're dealing with, for example, a factory in China or somebody that's sort of producing for you and also then is selling onto the local market, you get out of these difficult questions of cost prices and sales prices. But no, if you're dealing with an agent, then typically you'd have some kind of a market price or whatever wholesale rate you've agreed with them.
Okay.
So the next one comes as a little bit of a surprise to some people in terms of choosing which port to actually use to bring your goods in. Now, logic would dictate that you'd pick the port from a logistical point of view that's closest to your end users in your market to reduce your onward shipping costs. And in most cases, that will be the key criterion. But it's not always the case. And this, again, goes hand in hand with the question we were talking about just now of picking the right import agent. If there is a particular import agent who is expert in your product category and they have particularly good relations with a certain customs department in a certain city, then sometimes it can actually be worthwhile using that agent and that city, that port, regardless of whether your end market is. And it's not uncommon for companies in China to end up taking on quite significant onward transport costs because they've got a port of preference where they've got all the processes figured out. You kind of have to work on the expectation bringing goods through customs in China that things won't go smoothly. So if you manage to get a setup arranged where you do get things through first time without any storage charges and any delays, that's actually a very valuable thing. And sometimes that outweighs, the costs of onward shipping and delivery domestically. We've had clients who in the past have gone as far as actually having goods put into bonded trucks from a seaport, shipped inland to a friendly jurisdiction, and then had the goods cleared there. So there's all sorts of unusual things that you might not expect coming from overseas that would influence your choice of which port to use.
A question on that. I mean, I think this is a topic that's very important to listeners today, is this sort of inconsistency across ports of entry. And the GAC and all of these different organizations, they do keep trying to say that they will make it into one nice harmonized system. Listening to you this morning, in reality, that's still very far away from that. Would that be fair to say? Or?
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, no. And everyone has kind of got their own pet theory as to where it's easier and where it's harder. And some people will say that the further south you go, the more flexible things are. Some people
I'm sure there's a proverb for it, is there?
Yeah, it's about high mountains and emperors far away. But some people will also say that the further south you go, the less regulated things are, so the less predictable they are. And, but in truth, it really depends on what goods you're bringing in, because, and like I say, which agent you're using, because a lot of it actually comes down to relationships, the relationships of the agents with the particular customs department. No, make no mistake, there is considerable discrepancy in implementation of supposedly common policy across the different ports in the country.
Okay, I think that's a point worth mentioning and indeed labouring a little. Yeah, that was Shanghai, though. I think wasn't
that was.
it?
Yeah, I think most people might have guessed that one. That was the Bund and
no points for that.
Yeah. And obviously so is this. Yeah. And this is a kind of a more recent topic now, the free trade zones and what this means for import. And there was kind of a hope that this might open a bit of a backdoor and make things easier for bringing goods in. And that is true to a certain extent. But what's really happened is kind of the line of where the border lies has sort of been shifted in a few kilometers. So it is very easy to get goods into the free trade zone. But you still have to go through all the same processes to then get it onto the mainland markets. Now, for certain industries, this is a big advantage. For example, if you're Amazon and you do a lot of e-commerce, then it's a good way to bring goods in, have them warehoused there, and I think you get 30 days before you have to pay all the import duties of them. So you've got your goods close to market, and then when they get sold through, you clear customs and deliver them to the end user. But in truth, for sort of the majority of regular businesses, for the time being, it doesn't offer any particular advantage. We actually haven't used the free trade zones yet, and we've kept a very, very close eye on this one. I suppose what's more interesting about the free trade zones is that they are a sign of things to come. The experimental zones, they're now getting replicated across the country. So you've got free trade zones in Shanghai and up in Tianjin. And you can sort of see which industries are going to get liberated and which policies and procedures are going to be relaxed and loosened by keeping a close eye on the free trade zones. But unless you're in certain particular industries, and I think sort of there's a few healthcare items that maybe is easy to bring through the free trade zones, but the majority, for the time being, it isn't a golden path as such. But nonetheless, a very interesting thing to be aware of.
Yeah, I think it's typically one of those. The way China often implements new significant policies is to sort of corner off a little section and try it out for a while and gradually implement it over time. So, and I think a lot of people have been wondering why it's taking so much time for real tangible differences to happen. But in your work, you still haven't seen them, and you still think it's in that testing and in that kind of trial part.
Yes, no, for sure.
Okay.
Now, and we've talked about this question quite extensively so far, which is about getting the right customs agent. So this really is, if there's one decision that you're going to get right and wrong, this is probably the most important one. And it is worth spending some time doing some thorough networking and really sort of digging around within your industry to find the right guys. And for us, this has made all the difference in certain categories that we've gone. So, for example, we started out with a few years ago importing irrigation machines, and the nature of the irrigation machine market is that back then there was all these preferential customs policies. So it was tax-free, you didn't have to pay VAT, and you could bring your goods in. And then gradually over time, they've started to bring in taxes. And actually, this is more to do with the next slide here around making it in China. So in the past, with this particular client as an example, we started out by bringing in full machines, and then over time they raised the barriers of entry through various import taxes, VATs. So we started to bring in parts from overseas and assemble, and then eventually we started to buy a lot of the raw materials in China. And this is a deliberate policy on the part of the country to bring technology in, to create employment, to generate its own industries. And so sometimes you'll find, for a lot of product categories, to bring in the finished item is quite difficult and expensive from a tax point of view, but to bring in its constituent parts sometimes can be much easier. And again, to go back to this example of aromatherapy oils, it actually makes, in this case, they've got these restrictions around animal testing. And we have a client, and animal testing goes against their own internal policies. So you bring in the bulk, you do the bottling locally. It's, from a manufacturing point of view, it's a very, very simple process. But that way, you actually sell it as something that's been made locally. And this is something you see a lot of industry, like the car industry in China, works to a large extent in this. So a lot of the major car companies, they're actually exporting cars to China. They're bringing in all the parts and then assembling and bolting on in China. So it is sometimes, and again depends on the product category, worthwhile looking into whether bringing in raw materials, parts, and then doing some degree of fairly simple assembly in China might mean that you're able to circumvent a lot of restrictions either on documentation, licensing, testing, or very high import taxes that allows you to bring your goods to market. And like I said, we've had several customers that we've had to set up those kind of arrangements for. So it goes without saying, you've got to get your documentation right. And again, make the point once more, this is where a really good import agent will help you to do all the preparation. But this is something that you really need to develop as an expertise in-house. Obviously, that includes the team out in China, but it also goes for the team wherever you're exporting from. Oftentimes, the difference between getting this right and wrong is how the documentation is prepared by the exporter. So there needs to be quite a high level of communication and training to the teams that are preparing the documents in order to get them right. Don't lean on third parties to do the translation for you. Again, that's one of the skills that you're going to have to develop in-house. What are the common terms that are used for your products, for your goods within market, and actually have that lexicon as part of your internal expertise? Because if you rely on import agents, especially ones that aren't from your particular product niche, that's something that can often go wrong. Like anyway, there's sort of 3 levels of documentation. You've got to have your importing entity, so the business license and the tax license, all the documentation around the goods, your packing list, your bill of lading, commercial invoice contracts. But where people, and that stuff's fairly similar to elsewhere in the world, with the exception that a lot of it obviously has to be translated. Where people usually get stuck, though, is this very broad category of exceptional. So often there's requirements for certificates of origin that will have to be notarized, hazardous goods, anything that involves liquids, anything that has got sort of testing and CCC, and there's a very, very long list of other, sometimes ownership brand, and it's all very specific to certain product categories, and that's where you need the expertise of somebody an import agent that knows your product categories well, so you've got all those prepared well in advance and vetted and checked by them.
Perhaps you could expand a little on what CCC is and to whom that might apply. I think that's an important accreditation.
Yeah, so this is one of those areas that sometimes people find a little bit galling. You could have spent a lot of money having your products quality tested, European standards, globally recognized standards that you try and export to China, and they say, oh, no, sorry, we don't recognize that. We've got our own quality standards. And one of them famously is CCC 3C. And it applies to particularly electrical goods, toys, various categories like that. And in the past, to get a CCC approval for your product category meant probably, I think it was about 50,000 renminbi per item, and you had to go and send it for testing, and it took a long time. And it was commonly sort of felt as being rather obvious protection of Chinese industries. Now that... That's the fire alarm.
Sorry, guys, that's our typical Wednesday fire alarm. It will stop. It does stop, I promise. Oh, please stop.
Right.
And there we go. Hurrah!
But it's the cost of getting 3C certification is dropping now. They are making it easier. But nonetheless, China maintains its own product quality certification system separate from everywhere else. And this applies to a significant number of product categories.
So there are, beyond CCC, there are other areas where there are sort of standalone China standards that you have to meet.
Yes, absolutely, that's right. One small one, it's not a standards one, but it's sort of a documentation thing that people often get miss is anything that's packed in wood has got to be fumigated. And that it goes for pallets. And now I think they are now recognizing there's an EU woods search, but the number of times we've had goods held up because it's been put into the fumigation chamber. So sometimes using plastic wood. I think there's now recycled wood, and there's a standard of EU wood that's accepted. But again, if you've got crates or pallets, that all applies, and that's something that people often get unstuck on.
All right.
And I've forgotten telling you which cities is which now, haven't I think.
Where are we now?
That
looks south.
I think is that Wenzhou? I can't remember now.
No points even for you.
I know. Yes. This is Shenzhen.
Onward we go.
Timing is also an unusual one. Now, China's got a sort of widely recognized and a calendar that most people are now becoming familiar with. So have absolutely no expectation of getting goods moved into and out of China around Spring Festival, and ditto for the 3 weeks before and the 3 weeks after, because it just turns into logjam. And there's a couple of other sort of national holidays that are well publicized that you should also try and avoid. But there is also this kind of unwritten calendar, and China often moves to its own cadences, and you have these political movements that happen, or they have a new corruption crackdown. So, for example, I've got a good friend that has been importing kitchen utensils for hotels into China for 15 years, a long time. And he had a shipment of knives coming in one time, and it just so happened that there was a security crackdown at that particular period, and knives that he'd brought in many, many times with all the right documentations and all the clearances, 3 months they spent in the warehouse at the airport, and not for, just simply there was an internal crackdown of some kind of security scare about something that had happened, and so you really sort of kind of have to plan for the unknown, and these sort of mysterious rhythms of how the Chinese bureaucracy works.
I think, in this scenario, it's probably worth talking a little bit about some of the darker arts. So, for instance, in a situation like this, where something is stuck in customs or not getting through a process that you need it to, and there might be a suggestion of greasing the wheel a little or helping out, or, you know where I'm going with this.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
What would you say to people who encounter this? What advice would you give, either a big company or a small company? It doesn't really matter. What are the lessons to learn here in your experience, having seen this happen a lot?
Yeah, very good question. In truth, this is something that in the past used to be quite common and prevalent. But I would say of all the departments, customs is actually one that has cleaned up its act quite a lot, and that actually isn't the scope for that sort of thing that they used to be. A lot of it has been computerized, and they've got these X-ray scanners. They change the staff a lot. They move around the guys that run the customs agency, whereas before, customs was rife with that sort of thing, and in truth it was just kind of a cost of doing business, and a lot of people had no choice but to grease palms in some way. I would say in these days actually it's run pretty professionally. They have a fairly tight ship now. Now it varies from port to port. Again, kind of sort of further south you go, the more it goes. And some ports further south, it's still to this day it's hard to do things properly. And there's a lot of smuggling channels. I'd say that's the thing that you still see quite a lot of.
Slightly different to exporting.
Yeah.
I don't think we're telling our members to smuggle things on dinghies in from.
No, but what you see these days is you'll meet somebody in the industry who'll say you ship the goods to me in Hong Kong and I'll make them appear in somewhere in the mainland.
Right.
And so that sort of thing happens, and I'm not going to sort of advise people either way as to whether that's a good idea or not. In terms of proving arm's length from stuff. My suggestion would be that these days you actually don't need to do it. Okay. You can get things through effectively without having to give any kind of backhanders. That wasn't true in the past, but I'd say these days it is. And that's a slippery slope, and not one that we would recommend. But so in terms of timing, again, it's about getting expectations right. And I think
Mm-hmm.
How do we?
Next slide.
Next slide, please.
Absolutely. Let me help you there.
So one word firstly on Incoterms. I'm going to assume that everyone's got familiarity with how the Incoterms systems work. But on the next slide here, we've just got a little breakdown based on different types of Incoterms, what your China subsidiary would have to do. So, if you're obviously the more that the exporter does, so if you're going DDP, then the less that needs to be done by the local agent. And what we found is probably the best in terms of cost and effectiveness. The best route to go down is typically CIF. So you have your freight forwarders in the West take care of the shipping and insurance, and they usually can get access to kind of the best prices from the outbound ports. But then for the stuff that's local to China, so the customs clearance, the documentation, the payment of taxes, the local freight forwarding, it is worth using a local entity to do those things. Because typically, if you do DDP type arrangements, then the freight forwarders out west will lean on some kind of a third party that they use in China who might not be familiar with your products, and also that obviously they charge for the service. So these days, typically, we would always work with clients on the exporter CIF. They take care of all the shipping, and then we would do things locally, and that tends to be the best kind of solution. Yeah, and the last thing to talk about really is mindset. And so just now, this whole timing issue. As you can see, unexpected things happen. Sometimes it's very hard to predict. So if you talk to guys that have been in the industry for a while, you tend to have this kind of, a lot of wry humor, knowing looks, head shaking. But is this acceptance that if things have gone right, you've done really well. The norm is that there's going to be difficulties, there's going to be cock ups and snarl ups. So to set expectations low with people. So whenever we're talking about getting goods cleared through customs, we always go to great lengths to say, problems may arise, we can't guarantee a time, make sure that you've got lots of buffer built into timing. We really go to great lengths to say that again and again with people so that expectations are set really low. In terms of dealing with the customer guys themselves, most of them are good guys, that they're just doing their job. There's nothing malicious, particularly on their part. Sometimes you get the sense that they feel a little bit victimized, maybe as foreign companies in China or this and that. And truth is, the customer guys tend to be fairly reasonable, and most things get resolved. That's the basic thing to remember, even though it holds you up for a few days or it's a bit of extra cost. And to just view it as a cost of business in China. And we still make this mistake. I mean, we had a client, we were clearing some goods for her in customs in Shanghai, and she actually flew in to Shanghai a couple of weeks ago in order to build out her machine when it arrived. And, she had to change her flight back, and she had to stay and hang out in a hotel room in Shanghai for a few extra days. And, it's kind of the best you can do is say, very sorry, and we did try and, prepare for all this as well as we can in advance. But it's just making sure that everybody has got a reasonable sense of expectation and also, a decent sense of humor around how things are going to go with China customs.
And is that likely to change? I mean, I know we touched on this a little earlier, but as China moves to being a part of the top table of, which it is already a part of the top table of international business, so things like that have to become increasingly streamlined. So, like in other parts of the world where customs maybe are retrospective or where certain amounts are allowed out or sampled, et cetera, I think it's interesting to say, sure, it's grand and it'll all get there in the end, but surely that's to China's detriment and they need to fix that. Would that be fair to say?
It goes in two directions. On the one hand, the bureaucracy does become more efficient and transparent, and they implement a lot of IT systems that do mean that processes work quicker. But on the other hand, China is reaching the stage now globally of they feel that they are people that can set the rules. And you see this across all sorts of political, economic things, right? And so the more that they do that, and the more they expect the world to interact on their terms, that often the front line of seeing that happen tends to be customs. And so you see these divergent trends. Also, the Chinese bureaucracy, it's like the many-headed hydra. You cut off a head here and make things easier, but and it sort of reappears elsewhere, and they find a new way or a new process or a new kind of requirement. So overall, I would say things get more professional and streamlined, but that doesn't necessarily make things easier because sometimes the requirements increase. So, who can predict what the future will be? But I would say that those trends are probably quite likely to stay. Right, that was Hong Kong, and then I think we end here on, I can't remember now.
Well, while you're trying to remember where the pictures are, I'll invite people to send in their questions if they could, and I can see a few popping up. I'm going to start with one. Susan asks, what advice can you give on samples that would be expected when exporting to China? So I think the point there is maybe sampling in customs.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, it kind of depends what the products are, and if we're talking about the common practice on this, if there are requirements from the end user to prove that things have gone through customs, then obviously you do need to send stuff through the correct way. I mean, there are people with very small items like jewelry who they'll literally put it in their suitcase and take it in to show at a trade fair. But for a lot of goods, that's just not realistic, either because of size or because you actually have to show all the documents. So, for example, if you're selling at the Great British Brand Festivals through the CBBC, there is expectations on all the paperwork there. Samples, they have to clear customs the same way. Although what you can do with samples is you can send them through the courier services. So UPS and FedEx and people like that, you can often get samples sent through that way. And obviously, it costs a bit more because they would typically air freight them in. But yeah, so samples in the past, we have leaned on couriers extensively to get those in. And you can state that they are samples, and that's worked for us.
Okay, interesting to know. I have a question here from Tim, and this is, I think, very early on in the sort of taxes part of the world, and taxes and costings. If you're using several importers who buy your product, what happens if they're buying the product at various prices due to quantity? So I think that's about earlier on in the session when we're talking about making sure that you have the rate, the price with the subsidiary and your export prices similar, etc., etc. So if you've got various buyers,
so I'm assuming in that question then that those they're all separate import-export orders, right? It's not that you're selling to your subsidiary and then at different prices as
yes. I think that assumption is fair.
I mean, obviously there is some flexibility on price, and customs accept the prices move up and down. And you can, on the same HS code, sell to different importers at different prices. The one that will get you into trouble is if you're selling to the same person on the same HS code repeatedly at very, very different prices. Sort of read more than 50% difference type prices. But obviously customs, they accept the prices move up and down. They will also benchmark you against the same HS code from other import exporters. And if you fall outside of that band, that's a very quick route to being flagged up on prices. But it's okay to be selling at reasonably different prices to different importers on the same HS code.
Okay, so it is a manageable thing.
Oh God, yeah, that's a very normal thing.
But within a band of acceptability. But don't draw attention to yourself, maybe is the moral of the story.
Yeah,
all right. A question from Lee. Is there a solution or service provided by any company for importing goods and clearing customs, etc., for samples to be used for consumer research purposes prior to appointing an importer distributor in China, which means the products are not yet registered? And he's suggesting for alcoholic products. So I'd say probably that it isn't even a finished product itself, which is a challenge.
So if that was me, I would, I'd call up one of the courier services and put it in a box and see if it gets there or not. Because that is a way of getting stuff in.
Okay, so they are finished products. Lee's just typing in there. Yeah,
if you just need to get a few of them to somebody for them to be able to sample the product and test it out, I would use a solution like that. Because if you try and go through sort of regular customs clearance channels, you'll struggle, particularly for food, right?
And particularly for alcohol, because there's a whole extra level of testing, I think, that will come into that. All right. Well, I hope that was helpful. So as we're closing, I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the session this morning. In terms of a couple of practical takeaways, I mean, you've been quite practical in the different steps, but if you were to boil it all down to, like Desert Island Discs, if you were to boil it all down to just one song, or if you were to boil it all down to 2 or 3 things that you think are the most important things to focus on when exporting to China, or the things that cause the most issues for people that require the most attention, what would they be?
I would say, so once you've got your entity set up in China and you're going to start bringing your own products in, be led by an importer that deals commonly with products in your industry, and then lean on them to develop in-house the knowledge bank and the expertise of which HS codes and prices and documentation and how to translate those various things commonly works in that system. And once you've got that set up, sort of stick with it. Don't try and move around too much with different ports and different importing agents. So you can test and trial with things, but expect to have to build that up as a knowledge base and expertise within the company, both the team in China, but also the team that are doing the export from the West. And finally, be patient, think about the long term. Don't get too stressed out because goods are held up. Most things with a bit of reasonable negotiation, directly with customs or through the import agent, can be resolved. And just treat it as a cost of doing business in what still is an exotic place quite a long way away.
Yeah.
And you will get it solved and you'll get it figured out.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. I think that pretty much concludes our session for today. So thanks to Andy, to our speaker. Just if you enjoy these sessions, it is recorded and it will be posted on our website. You'll receive a message about that in about 24 hours or so. Some upcoming webinars that you might be interested in. We have on the 29th of July, IP protection for British design in China. On the 19th of August, I haven't put the link in there yet. I will do so soon. Patent protection in China. And then on the 27th of August, we have provisions in the new revised advertising law. So these sessions go on maybe one to two a month, certainly. And we'll do throughout the summer and into the autumn and winter. So that really is it for today. If you have any questions, please contact me. You'll have my email address on all of the correspondence that you've received about this webinar. Otherwise, you probably picked up Andy's email also. I'll happily pass on some questions or issues that you may have. If you enjoyed this session and would like us to do other ones in different topic areas, please do ask and we'll be happy to do that. Other than that, I wish you all happy China business and look forward to meeting you all again soon. Bye bye.